This morning I'd like to talk to you about the metaphysics of the New Way and the short explanation and of this idea and how perhaps I arrived at the organization of the metaphysical approach or the metaphysical foundation of the New Way. While it has some bearing to say that the study of philosophy has influenced it, and there was a time in college when I was considered a gifted student of philosophy. However, the real foundation has to be located in an experience I had while I was incarcerated. I'll briefly tell you that there was a time not long ago, not that long ago, when through an abundance of my own ego, I went to a man's house and trespassed and had a gun, and while no one was hurt, I had broken the law and was arrested, rightfully so. And to make a long story short, on the way to trial, at the end, right before trial, pled guilty to possession of an illegal gun and the trespass, both of which I was guilty of. The reason I tell you this is because on the way to prison, and I went to prison for 3 years, I was in jail. And while you may not have, probably don't have experience with the court system on that side of the criminal side of it, jail is often quite, well, it's almost similar to a maximum in the sense that the level of crimes of the prisoners can vary, of course, just from car theft or drug dealing or whatever like that, to all the way to murder and attempted murder and that sort of thing. So the jail can often be quite restrictive and high security. And I spent almost a year there, which awaiting trial. And during that time, as time progressed, after a few months, I became very familiar with the library and over time had, I guess, the privilege of being able to have some freedom to move from my cell to the library and without supervision. And of course, it was all enclosed and there was no possibility of escape, but it was a nice respite from the noise and the constant light and of my cell and the common room. And so I had some privilege of that to sometimes go between the library and that led one time to being able to go to visit when my parents came from out of town, and I would visit them. And so you may wonder what this has to do with the metaphysics, but I want to relate to you an experience during this time in jail that's very seminal to the development of the metaphysical foundations that I'm going to explain to you. So there were several times when I was called to go visit my parents, and I had to traverse a long path to get to the area where you could visit. And there was sort of not a breezeway, but a bridgeway. I want to say a concourse, but it was sort of an elevated bridgeway. And it was long, and it had windows, but you couldn't really see out of them very well, but there were windows on either side. Imagine sort of a gantryway, long, narrow, and the door at the end. And so I would walk around the corner and then down this long bridgeway toward the door, which would then lead to eventually to the area where I could where they had visitors for the. Now, one day when I was doing this, and I was walking and I came around the corner and started all alone down the breezeway. And as I took a few steps into it, the entire building began to move and shift. And when I say move and shift, I mean as if the entire structure were falling down. It was like an earthquake. And that is indeed exactly what I thought it was. I thought it was an earthquake. And I grabbed the walls and I held on as the building shifted and back and forth. The thing of it is, and the event lasted perhaps almost a minute, perhaps. I could see that the walls were not cracking, but it was as if the entire building was swaying back and forth to the point where I was holding on from one end of the wall to the other. And I thought, well, it's not an earthquake, it's a bomb, or it's some sort of something. But I was able. Again, there was no cracking on the floor. There was no debris. The sheetrock wasn't coming apart. So after I staggered and down the hallway toward the end, it completely came back to the normal four walls, perpendicular. Nothing had occurred, as if nothing had occurred. Now you can imagine the shock to anyone's sense of reality and what that meant. Every time I would go down to that hall at the same place, the same thing would occur. Now, it happened several times. All right, so that is the presenting cause of the beginnings of the thought process. So I would go back to my cell and with much time on my hands and think about the occurrence. I was taking no drugs. I never took any drugs. I was under no medication. Stress, yes, of course. There was stress. In jail, there always is, and in prison, there's much stress. But nothing out of the ordinary. I felt fine. During the event, rationality was there. I was aware of my surroundings. It did not seem like an illusion or a mirage or some sort of a reaction from stress. Did not seem to be that at all. So I began to think, how can that be possible? And did it really occur? Now on one hand, my senses told me that the event was occurring, but that after it finished, obviously nothing had happened. There was no bomb, and there was no earthquake. I spoke to no one about it, yet every time it would happen. Now, how can that be? It's easily dismissed as, again, you could say, oh well, you were under stress. I don't think that was entirely the reason. One could say also that there were unconscious anxieties and that surely is the case. However, it was a seminal moment, and it led me to a more serious desire to find a metaphysical approach to how the world is. And I will present that to you now. The world is of two. There are two worlds. One, there is the world of nature, and that world is the entire cosmos. The scale from the most tiny quanta all the way to the cosmic scale. Nature, as in our earth, the living creatures, all living, natural, the earth, air, the seas, water, matter, energy. We know that there is energy and that matter and that they move back and forth. All is frequency and all is a vibration. We cannot hold either that there is such a thing as nothingness. For if there were nothingness, though we can hold that as an abstraction of a thought and say that there is nothing, there cannot be no thing between two extensive objects. If there were, the objects would be the same, and there could be no motion. Yes? Motion is relative and is change, and when we measure the change in the material, we call that motion. And from there we obtain the dimension of time. So with no thing, with nothingness not possible, all things then are connected. In other words, say in space, which in the popular belief is a nothingness. But of course that's not true. There is energy flow of rays in space. So really in space one would basically be swimming in all the different rays and energies. So all is nature. There is no elsewhere. There is no supernatural. There is no above nature. There is nature. Nature is heaven. The cosmos and the world is eternal, and nature is one side, one part, or is the world. But for man, there are two worlds. What is the other world? The world of artificiality and subjectivity. Man is in that world. So again, to be simplistic, two worlds: the world of nature and natural, the world and the objective, if you want to term it that, and the world of man, which is artificial, technological manipulation, techne, and subjective. The interaction of these worlds is the core basis of the metaphysic. The energies and everything that man senses comes to him from the world of nature, but he does not see or experience that nature directly. The animals do, because the animals are unified in their being. They are what they are. There is no filtering for an animal in nature. Thus, animals are nature. But man is a part separated from nature. And why? Because man has de-evolved from the animal into something else, an ego. Man's ego and mind are, as it were, drawn apart into sort of a mind-body duality. I mean, one could go and look at Descartes, and his very, of course, famous saying is, "I think, therefore I am." And that is true for man, modern man, because his thinking separates him from himself, separates his mind from his body. Now, the metaphysic that I propose is that the energies of nature, as they present to man's senses, to man himself, are intaked into man, and through his ego and his mind and the filter of his personality, as a filter, as it were, of the lens, as it enters into the body of the man, man then reprojects this onto the screen of existence which lies between the world of nature and the artificial world of man. This screen then, on one side, you have energies coming through, but not all, because man himself projects a screen onto the real world. Thus, man really lives in his own movie, as it were. Man constantly is intaking the energies and reprojecting a movie of reality really all around him. One can imagine that that each man is surrounded by a totally believable bubble which he projects a movie of reality upon. Now, this reality, again, as I tell you, is not illusion, because it is a physical, material projection. Now, this may lead to a slight interesting corollary, a political corollary, and that is that each man, and by man I say, I use that as just a word device, I mean all of us, all man, woman, all sexualities in between, all of us, all people. I would just term man. But man seeks then not to be alone. He lives within a projected reality, and there is a drive, a loneliness, and a fear of others. And by that I mean that each man, according to his type, his personality type, has a sort of a filter in which that filter also changes the way his movie is projected. And of course, he himself sees himself in the movie that he projects. And he desires others to be in the same movie. That is the desire for love. That is the fear and fear of others also, and love, instills in man a desire to bring others into the same film, as it were, as characters in the same reality, to have a common reality. For what is politics? It starts with the family. It starts with the parents. The one all the way to the range of the many. How are the many brought into the same common ideologies, beliefs? It is a movie or a narrative in which one or several or many wish to bring others into that same belief system. We can say that of religion. Religion and politics really are the same. So that is the metaphysical approach, or the basis of the beginnings of understandings in the fourth way as presented in this teaching. One has to understand that that is the metaphysical foundation of how reality is constructed for man and how he is separated, his ego pulled away by the modern world so that he is not in touch with the natural world. If one were in the natural world, and that may be possible for man, man would experience, say, the grass, the air, a flower, in all its entirety. But man, apart from that, reprojects what he thinks a flower is. And that is why, at its most extreme, in the modern world, in the West, in America, you will see people, especially the bourgeois, the petit bourgeois, with plastic flowers on their porches. To them, the plastic flower is as good as a natural flower. And of course it's not, but in their minds, in their projected reality, it is. So after this, I want to talk to you about aesthetics, because the key to understanding much of this is signaled by the aesthetics of the modern man. Thank you.